All right. So thank you for sharing an hour of your time to learn about Bothell Stormwater Management Action Plan this evening. And just a heads up, you may refer to us, or you may hear us referring to this as our SMAP, just the acronym. It takes a lot less time to say. So if we say SMAP, know that that's what we're talking about. My name is Christy Cox. I'm with the City of Bothell, and I will be helping facilitate tonight's meeting. And before I introduce our panelists, I'm going to go over just a few housekeeping items related to using the Zoom platform for this meeting. First, we are recording this meeting and we will make the recording available to the public. My hope is to be able to have this presentation uploaded to YouTube and available on our SMAP webpage as early as I can tomorrow morning. I know there were a few attendees or participants hoping to join tonight but had conflicts. So this should help with that. And to help with any internet bandwidth issues, please mute yourself and turn off your video just during the presentation. Tonight, we invite you to use Zoom's Q&A function to ask your questions, just to help make sure that nothing gets lost in the chat. You can type your questions in at any point, and then we've set aside time at the end of the presentation to answer them one by one. And finally, please participate in the poll questions if you can. We have just a few simple questions to ask you to help us learn about our audience. And now I will introduce who's here with us tonight. If you've ever had any interest in City of Bothell storm and surface water projects and programs, you've probably already met Janet Gear, who is the City of Bothell supervising surface water engineer. Also joining us this evening is our consultant from Parametrics, Julie Brandt, who is a senior engineer specializing in surface water. Janet and Julie will be presenting the bulk of tonight's information, but we do have additional city staff here who were also involved in the planning process and who are here to help answer your questions. Our group of surface water program coordinators includes Amanda Royal, whose area of expertise is water quality, and myself, Christy Cox. My focus is on stormwater public education and outreach. And we have Rob Holbrook, who implements the city's illicit discharge detection and elimination program, as well as our stormwater source control program for businesses. With that said, thank you again for joining us. And now I'm going to turn things over to Janet to give you some background information about how we got to this point in the planning process. And while she is explaining that, I am going to put up our first set of poll questions, which are just two simple questions. So with that, Janet, be my guest.
Okay, thank you so much, Christy. So again, just a little bit of history so that we're all on the same page of why we're here this evening. So beginning in 2007, the Department of Ecology started issuing the city a stormwater permit, and they issue a new one to us every 5 years that allows us to discharge stormwater to our receiving water bodies, provided that we take certain steps to minimize those impacts on our surface waters. In 2019, Ecology issued the city a new stormwater permit, which included the previous elements that are listed on the slide right now, in addition to new elements. So each permit has new elements as they find new information and new things they'd like us to focus on. Could you move to the next slide, Julie? So one of the new requirements in 2019 was for us to delineate stormwater basins. And what that means is we had to break up our stormwater natural areas into what we called basin areas. We've chosen to call them surface water management areas. And we made sure that they were all equal in size. They met the criteria of the Department of Ecology. And then we were required to prioritize one basin and then one catchment area within that basin and come up with a plan of actions that included the budget and schedule to improve conditions within that specific area. So we went through a whole delineation. And then to prioritize them, we took a look at specific conditions within each area. For example, we looked at impervious surface coverage, tree canopy cover, developable land analysis, zoning, flow and water quality, monitoring data, existing infrastructure, all different types of things that we looked at in conjunction with each other to prioritize one basin. At that time, we chose the lower North Creek area using the raking system. because what we were looking at specifically was what was likely to improve on its own with new and redevelopment requirements, and what with the existing conditions needs a little help from us in order to improve. The other element that we looked at was Palm Creek within the lower North Creek Basin also had slightly higher monitoring scores than other basins in the area. And so we wanted to make sure we focused on that with an eye towards protection to make sure that the conditions there did not negative or weren't negatively impacted, so that we could protect it as much as possible. So with that, we went through a suite of actions that we could maybe implement within the lower North Creek area to improve conditions. So next slide.
And Janet, I'll take a moment to remind the group that, let the audience know that if you haven't already seen it, we're going to have a link to a story map at the end that provides more information and background about the prioritization process Janet just described.
Absolutely. So this overview slide is just a view of what we did, what the process we went through. So that's receiving water assessment, the prioritization, and then the Stormwater Management Action Plan. And so what we're looking at is a suite of options that Julie's going to go through that we can put into the plan. One of the things I did want to mention as part of this is if you want to see all of the citywide actions that we're doing, you're going to want to look at citywide plans. So we have our capital facilities plan that has a whole bunch of different projects and programs that we're working on, in addition to our stormwater master plan. But there are specific things that ecology is looking for. And so this map, you're going to want to think of it as a narrowed focus just to provide to ecology that meets their specific criteria. So where we are right now is in the education and outreach portion of this. We're developing our plan, and then we're going to bring that to council. So with Julie, with that, I'll let you take over the next slide to talk about this map.
All right. And so as Janet was explaining, there's been, this selection and narrowing process, identifying the North Creek Basin as the place to start. And now the city we're helping the city work on the final plan. And ecology has some requirements for what needs to go in. Ecology has been lots of fun with this because they call the Stormwater Management Action Planning the name of the process, and then they call the Stormwater Management Action Plan the document that the city is going to turn in. So to make things less confusing, we're going to use the term SMAP report. So and it really is the final plan of what the city is going to be doing. Ecology has requirements for the elements that have to go into the SMAP report. And the real major ones are they want the city to evaluate potential stormwater management facility retrofits. That means going back into areas that either have maybe more vintage stormwater management or no stormwater management, and see if there's ways to upgrade that. In addition, part of the whole mission of this special permit requirement, Ecology got together with the Department of Commerce, and they're looking at ways to help the stormwater management side of things work with the land management side of things. So Department of Commerce manages the city's growth management requirements and things. So this SMAP report will have a whole section about land management that the city has evaluated as far as how it can improve your local stormwater environment. And then finally, the other component that ecology wants the city to look at, if there's ways to go above and beyond, it's in the city already has an existing stormwater permit program that Janet was talking about earlier that has, where the city addresses all those different things that were on that list. And there's some of those elements like additional inspections or maybe some maintenance that can help support the SMAP goals. So we're going to talk about each one of those things in a little bit more detail in these slides. There's another half of the SMAP report that ecology requires, and we call those the supporting elements. So it's basically, okay, while you're doing this SMAP report, are there any other long-range plans, like some of the ones that Janet mentioned, where you have your citywide comprehensive plan, the stormwater master plan, any transportation improvement plans, that it would be beneficial to coordinate with, so that no department in the city is operating in a vacuum and all the efforts are coordinated, and they're looking for opportunities to coordinate that. Also, budget and schedule. So that even though this is a planning level document, and some of these things, budgets and schedules, will be refined later on, Ecology does want some preliminary idea of how the city plans on implementing that. And then finally, adaptive management is sometimes the phrase that Ecology uses, but there's a future assessment as far as keeping an eye on the whole process of implementing these actions and how those might change. So I'm going to keep it moving because we're also going to talk about some of these things in more detail. And Janet's going to go into a little bit more detail. This is the these are those stormwater facility retrofits that I mentioned on the previous slide.
Yes, so we have 3 in the short term. And again, you can look on our capital facilities plan. We wanted to make sure that these were already budgeted, that they are, considered within the system, and then they also meet those ecology requirements. So the first thing that we're doing as a city is we're looking at all of our existing stormwater ponds. A lot of them were developed before the current development standards that we have for stormwater ponds. And this is a great area where we can be really efficient and effective in either adding flow control or water quality treatment. So one of the first ones that we identified is Canyon Ridge Estates. It's a pond that's just outside the North Creek, Lower North Creek catchment area, but it drains directly to it. And what we found is the design of the stormwater pond does not capture adequate flow control and water quality treatment. And then the addition that we thought was really exciting is just upstream, there's a lot of velocity coming down the roadway that we can also put in neat water quality techniques, and we can test them. So for things like emerging technologies for removing like 6 ppdq and other elements. So we're looking at not just putting in check dams, for example, to slow the water, but what water quality treatment can we put in there? And then Amanda is testing these in advance so that over time we can see, are they working? Does it work well in the first year? Is it continuing to work over time? And so we're wanting to use this as an opportunity both to retrofit an existing system so it's got better flow control and water quality, but also to take a look at new technologies and what's working well and over time. So that's the first one that we're excited about. The second one, Palm Creek, goes under 228th at about 31st Avenue. And that culvert is undersized, but also we have some flooding issues there. And we also don't have adequate water quality treatment. So we thought this was a great one that is a little bit further down in the capital facilities plan. So we can put in a fish passage culvert, but at the same time, can we do additional, flow control and water quality with both either within the roadway or the right of way that we have. And because this is a major arterial route, it's overlaid and upgraded by transportation every 5 to 10 years. So it'd be a good opportunity to coordinate with them and make sure that, basically, like Julie had said, we're working really hard to make sure the right hand knows what the left hand is doing, and we coordinate those efforts to maximize the water quality benefit. So that's the second one. The third one that is currently in design and right-of-way acquisition is 35th Avenue. So 35th, we also, Colewoods Creek is in an 18-inch culvert right now. And so again, this is where that nexus comes in of a flooding issue, but both with inadequate flow control and water quality treatment. So what we're doing with this one is we're putting in a fish passage culvert. But we're also looking at what water quality elements can we put in. And then they're looking at this one for transportation in the long term to put in what they call, I believe it's multimodal. So they, sidewalks and bike lanes and that kind of thing. And so how can we add additional water quality treatment? This area does, because it experiences that flooding. We're looking at a couple things downstream as well. So on 240th Street. So this project is a really good nexus for this facility retrofit opportunity to provide additional flow control and water quality while also reducing a fish passage issue. So those are the three we have in the short term.
And before we get to the long term, I want to point out, like Janet, you mentioned all the different ways in which the city is trying to address water quality and then flow control to the streams, which impacts stream water quality. And those are the big goals that, and kind of the requirements that ecology has for this particular part of the permit. So Janet, you also mentioned how the 35th Avenue might have fish passage and alleviate some flooding. And those are more, those are things that the city is addressing on the side, but they're not in the specific focus. It's kind of a bonus because they're not in the specific focus of this particular ecology requirement.
Right, and that's an important piece just to mention that, you know, we're trying to meet ecology's requirements, but in addition, as all of you know, I'm sure we have a lot of other concerns within the city. So we're looking at multi-benefit projects. Where can we put in that water quality and flow control, but also address, you know, known issues within the community, trying to be as efficient as possible. And then we're going to get to this a little bit later in the budget, but just, you know, for example, you're looking at about $9 million just with these three, you know, shorter term projects. So these are not, this is not a small lift, you know, just for these three elements. Okay. So for the long term, one of the things we wanted to mention, if you look in our capital facilities plan, you'll see SW 1, 2, and 3. And what we did is we put these in order to, again, work with other divisions and departments to be efficient and effective, but also to maximize that water quality and flow control benefit. So what these are for the long term is we have slated money and put it aside for if, you know, a capital project is going forward and it's it has inadequate flow control water quality, we're going to put that in as part of that project. That's SW1. SW2 is specific to pond retrofits. So we're looking at the whole city, citywide, and but there's several ponds within this, you know, catchment area that what can we do to improve conditions for flow control and water quality treatment. And SW3 is specific to how can we repair and in a short term until we can put those on the capital facilities plan for a long-term fix. And so, for example, that's are we having a conveyance issue? So we're slip lining pipes, but that's also where can we put additional infiltration, or, you know, if we have an issue with there's certain pipe materials that we are finding do not last as long as we thought they would for their useful life. And so how can we repair and replace those in that short term until we can plan a bigger, you know, effort that's like maybe a community or a neighborhood wide. So that's what this longer term is, because we want to make sure that, well, our capital facilities plan is 6 years. What they're asking us to do is how do you look out to about 20 years? And this is how we're doing it currently in the capital facilities plan is SW 1, 2, and 3. That's that long-term planning to make sure we have adequate funding to address long-term concerns.
Thanks, Janet. And so that's the summary of the first category, those stormwater retrofit opportunities. And the second thing that ecology requires of the city is to look at land management. Now we want to be careful because land management gets complicated. You know, the city really is very careful about the process of like revising. It's not just about revising zoning or looking at codes. There's a lot of other things that can go into it. And we'll go through those details of what some of the approaches are that the city has selected. Ecology's, you know, mandate, if you will, like what they're requiring of this are actions that will all relate back to water quality, things that might reduce pollutant loading, things that might preserve vegetated areas, or restore areas that are already paved. And so with all of that in mind, all of those considerations were part of the screening process that the city used to come up with, again, and for every one of these categories, again, ecology requires some short-term actions from 0 to 6 years to be identified, and some longer-term actions from 7 to that 20-year horizon that Janet mentioned. So one thing that Bothell, along with a lot of cities, are doing is pointing out, and ecology cares about this, pointing out actions that have recently been completed, you know, to set the right context for the basin. And one big thing that Bothell has done is the Fitzgerald 35th Avenue Southeast sub area. And Janet, would you like to expand a little bit on some of the elements of this sub area plan?
So, it was really ahead of its time as far as the low impact development requirements, protection of critical areas, and critical wildlife habitat. It is actually reaching up, for example, with the low impact development to areas where, we're getting our standards up with the rest of the city, which is great. But we do have those additional requirements in there, which does protect this area. And so we wanted to make sure that was mentioned. We also were specific to the Canyon Park Regional Growth Center, and this is because our community development division department, I should say, was actually working on revisioning this area for our Growth Management Act requirements. But also we wanted to make sure, what could we do in this area to protect and preserve our critical areas and stormwater management while they're doing that. And so, for example, what we looked at is level 3 flow control within our surface water management requirements. And what that means is they just have to do the maximum no matter what. So there's no question about making sure that downstream impacts are mitigated for, that they're going to do the maximum absolutely of what's required. The other thing is enhanced water quality treatment. So they're looking at things like heavy metal inputs and other aspects. So we just wanted to make sure, there's no question in this area, you're going to do the maximum of what's allowed within the design manual. And so those are just some examples. The other thing that we've looked at is currently they are at 100% impervious for commercial surfaces, minus the setbacks and landscaping requirements. But what the nice thing with the maximum stormwater management standards is it's really a disincentive for you to have 100% impervious on site. And so we've been working really closely with our community development folks just to make sure that we are, maximizing green space, that with a lot of times it's actually happening as part of the development process because they see the benefit of adding those low impact development techniques, but also just with all of these maximum requirements, they know that, there's no conversation back and forth with the city about what you have to do. So those are just a couple of examples of what we're already doing and we're already implementing within that area. But we do want to look at long-term. The regional stormwater facilities that are in this area do need some upgrades. And so we've talked to both state and local funding agencies about what we can do to bring those up to current standards. And then what we can do as far as additional either low impact development techniques that can be installed on site. So we're looking at long-term doing more of a feasibility evaluation about what can be done within that visioning area, in addition to what will already be done as a part of the new and redevelopment.
And so the final category that ecology wants the city to look at is kind of any sort of targeted, enhanced, or more frequent elements from the existing stormwater program. And of all the different categories that Janet, I think the city has selected almost one different thing from each of the categories that ecology recommends as being applicable to SMAP from the existing program. So for source control, the city is going to be looking at it's one of the new requirements in the permit is looking at doing source control inspections to go in and check in with businesses, different institutions, commercial sites, to see if there's just housekeeping practices and things that they can do on site to reduce pollution. And so Bothell's required to do that throughout the city, but ecology encourages and accepts, prioritizing that element in this important basin and starting it first and making sure that it's, if you need to do a few more inspections or going a little bit above and beyond, those source control inspections and actions are prioritized for Lower North Creek. For public education and outreach, there's a number of business partnerships opportunities in Lower North Creek. And Janet, could you expand a little bit on the conservation district aspect of that public education outreach?
Absolutely. And then, later in the Q&A session, Christy leads this effort, so I'm sure she'd be happy to explain. But we have a unique situation in Bothell that we are half in King and half in Snohomish County. So we're able to utilize both conservation districts in order to do really good work within the community. And so both Snohomish County and I shouldn't say county, Snohomish Conservation District and King Conservation District have elements of education programs, on-site help for installing rain gardens, for example, all different kinds of great community work that we like to partner with those organizations to work on private land with private landowners when they want kind of a separation between the city and themselves. The business partnerships, we are working with the Park Creek right now within the North Creek Business Park, actively working with a couple of business communities there. And then, we just have a lot of citywide excellent programming with nonprofit agencies as well as through the city to provide good education and outreach. And then again, that is focused within this area as far as everything from septic outreach to bird feeding to pet waste stations, all different types of great outreach that we're doing. And then the operations and maintenance inspections. So we do sweep the whole city, but we are looking at increased frequency of both our private facility inspections and our sweeping activity within the lower North Creek Basin. And then the IDDE, both Rob and Amanda can speak to, but we are making sure that we are doing both water quality sampling, but also dipping into the MS4, and so that we can start detecting those fecal coliform sources or E. coli sources within the storm system. Sorry, I'm using acronyms. MS4 is Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System, which basically is our storm system. So we're doing both in storm and within this receiving water monitoring.
And I'll put in, I want to add a little detail too, that for the folks attending, the city of Bothell has a really robust illicit detection, basically non-stormwater connections into the system, something that isn't rain, that shouldn't be there. Really robust program to track down fecal coliform. And actually other cities have looked to Bothell for an example for the program that they put together. So the cities are doing a lot with that, and then kind of going, looking at is there more that can be done in lower North Creek, even beyond that. And then in the long term, again, for IDDE, looking at ways that would be meaningful for focused or more frequent screening for lower North Creek area. And that's just beyond the fecal coliform, but just all illicit detection and elimination. And the public education and outreach more in the long term, looking for ways to encourage LID on private property. And part of the reason this was put in the long term is that, the city doesn't want to like show up pounding on your door. But it's more what's feasible, what's manageable, what's meaningful and helpful, both for residents and the environment. And then finally, looking at an enhanced maintenance plan, specifically, and Janet, would you like to speak a little bit to the situation that the city has with the decant facility too?
Certainly. And again, Rob's great work. He applied for a Department of Ecology grant, and we were accepted because what people don't realize, with increased sweeping and maintenance of your stormwater system, you have increased hazardous waste that has to be decanted and incinerated in order to make sure that we are maintaining that properly. And so the more we sweep, the more we use our Vector trucks and that type of thing, the more waste we have. And so our decant facility is at capacity. And so Rob is going through a whole process with our operations group this year to go to develop an enhanced maintenance plan. And what that will identify is what do we need? Do we need additional equipment and resources? How much do we need to upsize that decant facility so that we can take those hazardous wastes and manage them properly? So this year we're going to develop that plan, and then long term, based on what the plan says, we're going to put that into our budget and then request assistance from ecology to make sure that we get those long-term fixes so that we can continue to maximize our operations and maintenance activities as much as possible.
And then so finally, of all the elements that we've talked about, ecology just really wants every city to demonstrate that they've got their act together, that they're not just putting some stuff down on paper. So as I mentioned before, one of those components is coordination with other long-range plans, like those listed here. But one thing I wanted to also add is that some of the elements that the surface water department is going to try and work with the other departments on are obviously project funding, project and funding efficiencies. Are we all doing something in the same place? Let's do it together. But also aspects of climate resiliency. There are really meaningful ways to design projects and also prioritize which projects in order to prepare the city and kind of manage and lower some risks based on potential climate changes coming. And then also equity and environmental justice, and working with the other departments and identifying areas that may be less served, and facility types and frequencies of things that can be addressed. So those elements are part of this long-range plan coordination with the other departments. Also, budget and schedule. Ecology wants, some planning level, but specific elements for budget for both short-term and long-term actions. And I should mention that a lot of these, we're working with the city right now to summarize all of these in the report. And Janet, as we're wrapping up, Janet's going to talk about the schedule of all these things. But so a lot of budgets have already been identified for the different actions we talked about. And then also likely and potential funding sources. The nice thing about having everything organized into this SMAP plan is that it makes things more justifiable and transparent to a lot of the grant agencies out there. So the goal and the hope is that the city won't be doing this on their own, and that there will be, other agencies recognize the importance of some of these actions and hopefully will be providing the city some funding. And then finally, there's the future assessment. Ecology does not want what the city talks about right now to be written in stone. However, they also don't want it forgotten about or just passed by real quickly. So the city has developed a specific schedule and specific questions to ask about each of these actions that mainly in general result in, is this working? Do we need to do anything different? If we do this in another basin, again, would we do anything differently? So that it's always a dynamic and improving process. And so, and there's a schedule for the elements remaining. I'll let Janet talk about that.
Certainly. So we're in the process right now of developing that SMAP report. Our intention is to bring that to council for review February 14th during a study session so that we can go through that together. And it will incorporate any of the suggestions and comments that you are able to make via the story map, which you'll see a link at the end of our presentation. But definitely, feel free to take a look at the different elements we've talked about. A couple of the things that I wanted to mention too with Julie was they did a great job helping us bring the GIS mapping together. So you can really see the different aspects of what we're talking about. And then they do have an equity and social justice section. So you can kind of see that overlaid over the area, in addition to things like land cover and impervious surface, all of the elements that we were looking at, you can see those readily and get an idea of where we're going. And then once we send this to City Council for review, we will adopt in March. The Department of Ecology deadline to adopt our report is the end of March. And so we're going to try to make sure we do that within the first or second week of March is our intended timeline. So with that, those are our next steps.
Thank you.
Christy, I'll turn it over.
Yes, thank you very much to Janet and Julie. And now we're going to get started answering your questions. And I do, as Janet mentioned, I want to remind everyone that our SMAP virtual open house remains open through this Sunday, January 15th. On that website, there are several ways you can provide comments at that site. So there's either you can do a text box, or there's interactive maps where you can put a pin in a specific location that you have a concern or question about. So if you haven't already had a chance to check that out, I really do encourage you. It's got some great information on there. Speaking of that virtual open house, I'm going to launch one more poll question, if you wouldn't mind answering, just to see if anyone has visited it yet. And then I will get started. So far, we just have one question. So please, I encourage you, if you do have a question. Okay, I see another one just popped up. Good. But I'll start with the first one. For the project SW21, Palm Creek and 228th, what's the area planned to be open for fish passage through the proposed upgrade? And are there additional culverts upstream of 228th that would also need to be addressed?
So I'll take as far as what's going on with the project. So underneath 228th, that is an undersized culvert. And so we are going to upsize that. There is a private pipe just upstream of that culvert. And so the project will look at taking on that pipe and making sure there's a transition there. Downstream is our focus, but upstream, Amanda, I think you can speak to that a little bit of what is upstream, and then it goes directly into Snohomish County.
Yeah, that's correct. The headwaters come from Snohomish County. The area up above is a really nice deep ravine, but there are 2 culverts that are not fish passable right now that need to be addressed in order to get access to that area.
Okay, next question. Do you have any updates on latest science for whether the city's street sweepers are able to remove 6 ppd tire particulate from roads? And are most of the roads in the lower North Creek Basin curbed?
Those are both good questions. I can't speak to the curb without actually doing an analysis of that. I will say that our street sweepers are adequate for pulling up the sediments within the roadway. We are actually looking at 2 new vacuum sweepers. One was approved in the 23-24 budget, and so they are looking at that. And then we actually asked for additional equipment to maintain LID facilities, which is a smaller vacuum sweeper that can do like some of the smaller trail sections, pervious sidewalks, that type of thing. So those are both included in that current budget cycle.
All right, thank you. Next question. Is water from Southern North Creek Forest being piped to Park Creek instead of North Creek?
There is one section of Park Creek that is being piped underneath North Creek. That is within the North Creek Business Park.
Okay. That is all we have in the module. Oh, good. Another question. Okay. What plan/methods are being considered for tire dust removal from entering the watersheds beyond sweepers? Nordic countries are trying the use of gully pots.
Oh, that's interesting. So, and I'll let Amanda speak to this a little bit, but what we've found initially is that infiltration is your best. And so they're looking at like bioswales. There are different techniques outside of some of the proprietary systems that we're looking at that are actually providing better removal of 6 ppdq and other chemical elements. But Amanda, I don't know if you want to speak to that specifically, or I can pull that up.
Well, I guess the other thing I can add to it is what they found with 6 ppdq is it's really, really small. And so you really need high energy efficient sweepers to get it off the streets. I believe Snohomish County has a couple of sweepers like that, and they've been running some studies to see how efficient they're being. So it's something where the particle's very, very small. It takes a little bit to get it off the streets.
Right, but yeah, as far as the actual BMPs and being installed in site, they're looking at infiltration as being the best so
right.
far.
Yeah.
And so the other techniques that they're looking at, some of the systems where they've got like active media and that kind of thing to remove pollutants aren't as effective as the infiltration. So
Right.
those are some of the things that we're focusing on are bioswales, not necessarily specifically rain gardens, but anything that you're allowing that that capture of those small particles that Amanda's mentioning.
And they Ecology just put out a manual for BMPs for 6 ppdq, and we're taking those recommendations into consideration on our new planning projects. They've found that a mixture of compost and sand together does a really good filtration of 6 ppdq and removes it. So we have a huge document with lots of different recommendations on BMPs for stormwater management.
Next question. I'm interested in hearing more about education and outreach. Are there special programs for streamside landowners in the lower North Creek Basin? And Janet, if you want, I can get started on this. And if you have
Please
anything to
do.
add, please feel free. So we do work with the conservation districts quite a bit. I know they do offer specific programs for streamside landowners. Another thing that we have done for our behavior change program, which is another ecology requirement, we have focused on natural yard care for a number of years. And for this current permit cycle, we chose a priority audience of homeowners living along streams in the lower North Creek Basin. So in 2021, we held a series of workshops, and the mailing list for that demographic was rather small. And unfortunately, we did not get very much turnout. So for this year's programs, which were held in spring, we expanded that mailing area to not only include North Creek or lower North Creek streamside landowners, but any City of Bothell landowner whose property was in or intersected a stream or a tributary of a stream. And our expectation was that we would get a lot more participation. That unfortunately was not the reality. So for our behavior change program for 2023, we're going to have to look at trying to find other strategies to be able to really reach some of the streamside landowners. And stay tuned. And if you have suggestions or know of a program that has been successful with that, I'm happy to hear suggestions. Another thing that we've done as part of our TMDL program is we do an annual septic system maintenance workshop with Terry King from Sea Grant. She's a septic specialist here in Washington. And we send out direct mailers to every known septic owner within the city of Bothell, which there are still about 2,000 homes that are on septic, and we get a good turnout for that. We offer follow-up specifically through the conservation districts, because landowners do seem to be a lot more comfortable and willing to work with the conservation districts because they're a non-regulatory agency. So those are a couple of our programs. And Janet, if you have anything else you want to jump in with, let me know.
No, definitely. We just we're trying to partner where we can and provide active programs throughout the year for various BMPs to try to help people implement practices in their daily activities.
Mm-hmm. All right, our next question is, are there any plans to remove the pipes in North Creek Forest that were put in to reduce erosion?
I do not know of any plans to remove those at this time.
Okay, we can always check with our parks staff also to see if they're aware. Next question, well, not a question. It says Heather Trim was discussing the use of compost last week to remove the tire dust. Yeah, Heather Trim, if you're not familiar with her, she's with Zero Waste Washington, and she has lots of useful information if you ever have an interest in learning about sciencey stormwater things. She's a wealth of information. I don't see anything else in the Q&A right now, but we'll leave that open for a couple minutes because we still have we have till 7:30. So don't be shy with your questions if you have anything you want to ask. Again, we are recording this. We'll put this link to the workshop on our website. Oh, one more question. How is surface water management communicating water quality changes over time with people in the city? Are there any dashboards or annual publications?
So Amanda, do you want to speak to our TMDL report and stream health assessment?
Sure. So every year we're required to turn in a TMDL report reporting on, for Bothell, we have 2 streams for fecal coliform. So we do release that report annually, and in that report also reports on trend. We have been looking at fecal coliform trends since 2010. And we monitor 5 locations within the city on a regular basis. And then in addition to that, we also do ambient monitoring where we have an additional 7 locations in the city. We visit those locations monthly, and we are collecting anywhere from dissolved metals to nutrients, bacteria, turbidity, temperature, and all of that data is going to be published early summer, late spring in a water quality annual report. And our hopes is we're also looking at all the sub basins. So we have Lower North Creek, but within Lower North Creek, we've got Palm Creek sub basin, and we have Cole Woods Creek sub basin. And what we're starting to do is look at those sub basins individually and be able to report on those tributaries and say, Palm Creek has a little bit higher phosphorus coming down than it should. So we're going to be able to really tease those different tributaries out and see what kind of impairments are affecting those tributaries.
Right. And the only thing I would add to that is that, the source tracing as well. So when we're finding these spikes, we're actively seeking where that might be coming from so that we can eliminate those sources. And that's where Amanda and Rob work really well together to start looking at what techniques or maybe what other sampling agents we can utilize to see see if we can eliminate as much as possible any of those inputs.
Our next question is, are temperature and flow included in your water quality plans or just chemicals? And before you answer that, I did add a link in our chat just now, the report, the TMDL report Amanda was speaking about. We post that annually as well as all of the other reports that we submit to Ecology on our website. So I put a link in the chat to where you can find. I believe we have the current permit cycle, which started in 2019, as well as everything from the permit cycle before this one posted on that site. So question again was, are temperatures and flow included in your water quality plans or just chemicals?
For the water quality report, we are collecting both. Temperatures are collected on a monthly basis. We do have some areas within the city where we have temperature loggers deployed that are continually taking measurements every 15 minutes. And then we do collect flow measurements on a quarterly basis.
All right, thank you, Amanda. We have no open questions at the moment, but we've still got some time.
Do we have any poll questions left, Christy, or are those all the ones that we had?
That's all we had. I wanted
Okay.
to keep it as simple as we could. So thank you everyone for participating in the poll. I guess I will, if we want to wrap things up and give everyone back about 9 minutes of your lives, we can do that. I want to thank the audience for participating tonight. We really appreciate that. I do see one more question. Oh, 2 more questions. Good. Okay. How is Bothell educating people on car washing? I can take that one. Throughout the year, we have a number of ways that we try to put out car washing education. And I think what Andre is referring to is trying to get people not to wash their cars on hard surfaces that will then drain into the storm drains. Alternatives that we recommend are either using a commercial car wash or, a self-serve car wash bay, or if you are going to wash at home, if you have a permeable surface you can wash over, such as soil or grass, where the water can soak in, you can do that. You can also create a makeshift berm. Sometimes people will roll up towels to try to redirect that water into a landscaped area instead of out into the street. So we have e-news articles, we do Facebook messaging each month for Puget Sound Starts Here month, which is in September. We have, well, last year and this year, we have focused on car care BMPs. One of those is car washing. The other two are fixing vehicle leaks and proper tire inflation, because it will reduce the amount of 6 ppd entering the waterways. Another thing that we do is if we do get a report of residential car washing that's affecting a catch basin, we start with education and outreach before, jumping right into enforcement. So if there's a report of car washing, then we'll educate the person that, I don't want to call them the offender, but the person that did it that may not have known any better. But we also send out a mailing to other people along that street or in that cul-de-sac or in the neighborhood, just so that everyone is aware of, that we don't have a car washing law. However, it is against code in our Bothell Municipal Code to allow such pollutants to go down the storm drain. So that's what we're really trying to educate people about. Another question: are there any plans to work with nonprofit partners for education and outreach? And I know currently we work with Whale Scout, we work with Friends of North Creek Forest. We usually volunteer for or partner for volunteer events a few times throughout the year. Janet, do you want to speak to partnerships with like Utah, Bothell, and Cascadia?
Certainly. So we partner with their sustainability groups to provide outreach at key times throughout the year. We also work to make sure that they're aware of what we're doing and we're aware of what they're doing, just to make sure that we're not in conflict with each other too, which is very important. Christy, I don't know if you wanted to mention, but the Adopt a Drain program, that's a big regional effort that's working with other folks. And then the Puget Sound Starts Here campaign also works with a lot of nonprofit groups to share education or outreach across the western portion of Washington state.
Yes, definitely. We joined a regional Adopt a Drain program last September. This is something that a few of the Puget Sound jurisdictions discovered. It's run out of Hamline University in Minnesota, who has a very successful Adopt a Drain program. Some of us jurisdictions have hosted our own individual programs. Bothell's had one for a long time, but we have very low participation. So we figured watching the growth of this regional program was a good way for us to try to help spread awareness about storm drains and increase the level of stewardship that people can do. So I think as of right now, we have about 116 drains adopted, and all that requires is that people check their storm drains maybe once or twice a month, remove any debris that's around them. And it's also a good way to remind people to be keeping an eye on those storm drains. If you do see pollutants that are near them, then you can call our spill hotline 24 hours a day, and we'll have someone out there to respond. And Andre says rinseless and waterless is an inexpensive, safe method, especially for units that can't wash. There have been some promising results, I'll say, with some of the waterless car wash products. I know they're not for everybody. Some are better than others, but that definitely is an option. Okay. No open questions. Does anybody have any parting thoughts?
I just want to encourage everybody again to take a look at our story map and provide any comments or anything you might want to have us take a look at. We always appreciate your feedback, and very excited again at all the work that we've done with the GIS to map all of those different elements so that you can kind of see how they spread out, citywide, but specifically within that area. and more than happy to talk about those. And the intention going forward is to, every few years, we haven't established exactly how often, but we're going to look at those elements and see how they're changing over time, how we're making progress, and if we're not, to implement new programs and projects through the capital facilities plan, for an example, and the citywide comprehensive plan, to make sure that we're protecting and preserving those areas and restoring where we can.
Exactly. Thank you, Janet. All right. If we've got no objections, then we'll give you back 3 minutes of your life.
Well, thank you again so much for participating.
Yes, thank you very much, everyone. And enjoy the rest of your evening.